its effort to provide answers about what happened on the night of the attack. The comprehensive report that we have received this morning records the very detailed summation of Sir John Saunders' findings and is the embodiment of the care taken by him to fulfill its purpose. We recognise that many aspects of the latest published volume will make for difficult and distressing reading for those most affected. On behalf of Greater Manchester Police, I thank the inquiry team for the opportunities that we have been given to participate fully and fairly in the inquiry process, and we welcome today's report. I fully accept the findings of the Chair, Sir John Saunders. Beyond the selflessness and professionalism of so many of our frontline staff, it is also clear that our coordination of the response to this atrocity was poor. We had failed to plan effectively, and the execution of that which was planned was simply not good enough. Our actions were substantially inadequate and fell short of what the public have every right to expect. And for this, I apologise unreservedly. Our failure to effect proper command and control of the incident from the outset undermined an effective multi-agency response to a dreadful set of circumstances. We did not act upon learning from previous exercises which could have reduced the burden or impact felt on the force duty officer. Poor communications, poor planning, inadequate training, and shortcomings in strategic leadership all played a part in our failure. All of these failings could and should have been identified and mitigated through learning from robustly designed training exercises under the auspices of our local resilience forum. Alas, these were opportunities that were not sufficiently taken. Sadly, GMP's combined failings were significant. To the families and loved ones of those who died, I am truly sorry. It is important that we now take the time to carefully consider every facet of the volume published today, and we have a dedicated team already in place for this purpose. But I also want to reassure the public that we have not waited for the publication of today's findings before making a number of substantial and beneficial changes to our operating model. In recent years, GMP has strengthened its leadership at all levels and has placed a premium on core operational competence and effectiveness. We have developed a detailed memorandum of understanding with the British Transport Police for the arena site, amongst others, to ensure absolute clarity between our organisations as to roles and responsibilities. We have now a rigorous process to ensure the greater testing and practical awareness of multi-agency communication methods to the point today where their use is second nature. GMP has dramatically enhanced our commitment to the Greater Manchester Local Resilience Forum, and indeed one of our senior officers currently chairs this important element of our joint preparedness. We have completed the wholesale reform of our force control room function. Significant investment has enabled single-site working, additional staffing, and enhanced training. We have improved the way that we debrief critical incidents so as to better capture and share organisational learning. We've invested substantially in improved first aid training and equipment for all our frontline officers. For example, all GMP vehicles have been issued with enhanced first aid kits, which include tourniquets, and we have significantly enhanced the number of defibrillators routinely available to our staff. In short, I am already able to confidently state that GMP is now in a fundamentally stronger position than it was in 2017, should we be called upon to lead and respond to a similarly challenging and terrible event. I say this not least because GMP and our partner agencies have sadly had to apply our combined resources to a number of real-life major incident responses since 2017. In these circumstances, the fact that we have reviewed and tested our multi-agency responses have proven beneficial in delivering the professional and well-coordinated operational effect required. I am also able to provide an assurance that our learning is currently being widely shared. Whilst the inquiry has considered a dreadful event in Greater Manchester, the eyes of policing nationally are upon this report. We have already established a clear means of disseminating the learning throughout policing under the auspices of the National Police Chiefs Council and through the Counter-Terrorism Police Network. As I have already indicated, we now have more work to do and will do so in earnest. I would like to stress the point that because of the terrible events at the arena that night, we do things differently and better. On the night, many of our officers ran bravely straight into the face of danger and gave of their very best to help those injured by any means necessary, with courage, determination, and compassion, and without regard to their own safety. And I am grateful to the Chair for his acknowledgement of their commitment and for the positive words written of their contribution. I am also proud of the painstaking and exemplary criminal investigation which followed the attack and led to the extradition and conviction of the bomber's brother on 22 counts of murder with a minimum term of 55 years imprisonment. The horrific nature of that which is still being endured by so many drives us to ensure that we will never repeat these failings. In this, the public can be confident of our resolve. This is the very least of what GMP can offer to those who are still suffering. A fierce determination to ensure that your loss and hurt will not be in vain. Ladies and gentlemen, I would now like to introduce to you Chief Constable Lucy Dorsey, the Chief Constable for the British Transport Police, who will make a statement of her own.
Good afternoon, everyone. Here in this city, 22 people were murdered by the evil actions of terrorists, and hundreds of lives were changed forever. We will never forget them and those who must live with a pain they don't deserve to feel. Today, we heard the recommendations made by Sir John Saunders and the Manchester Inquiry team. British Transport Police accepts their findings and recommendations, and I thank them for allowing us to fully participate in the inquiry. Significant errors were made in the hours leading up to this horrendous attack and in the immediate aftermath. Our planning and preparation was inadequate to respond to an incident of this magnitude. For those errors, I want to apologise to the families of the victims and to every one of you affected by that terrible night. On behalf of everyone in British Transport Police, I am truly sorry. There were mistakes and misjudgments, but there was also compassion and bravery. Police officers and staff who ran towards the attack without hesitation, as well as security staff and members of the public. In the time that has passed, those responders have also carried the trauma of that night. They too deserve our support. This is a part of BTP's history which we will never forget. And as you would expect, today's report does not mark the start of our improvements, but it acts as an invaluable aid to build on the improvements we have already made and are continuing to make since May 2017. We are already working more closely than ever with the agencies alongside me here today, committing to programmes of joint exercising and testing so that we are better prepared. Our major incident plan has been reviewed, simplified and improved, and our officers are better trained, including those in key command roles. In BTP, one of our values is that we strive to be better every day. This means continually improving our planning and response to major incidents. The changes we have made and those that are planned mean we are in a much stronger position to respond effectively with our partners to incidents of this nature across the railways of England, Scotland and Wales. The families and friends of the victims and the City of Manchester will continue to grieve for years to come. We share this heartache, not just as an organisation, but as individuals. No learning can turn back the clock. No apology can mend a broken heart. We can only reflect on today's report with candour, and I absolutely promise you we will do better. I'm now going to pass over to David Russell, Chief Fire Officer.
Good afternoon, everyone. The Manchester Arena Inquiry Volume 2 report has made for very difficult reading for me as Chief Fire Officer of Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service and my colleagues. I want to start by wholeheartedly apologising to the families of the 22 innocent people who lost their lives on that tragic night of the 22nd of May 2017, and to the survivors whose lives are changed forever. Our response that night was wholly inadequate and totally ineffective, and that will forever be a matter of deep regret for our service. We let the families and the public down in their time of need, and for that I am truly sorry. I know that no apology will take away the pain and suffering of the families who lost loved ones and of the survivors, but I want them to know that I fully accept the inquiry's criticisms of our service, and I accept the recommendations in full. I also want to thank Sir John Saunders for his work throughout the inquiry and in producing this report. The inquiry's process has been one of the most challenging times in our service's history, and today is a very difficult day for many, especially those who so desperately wanted to help that night. Every firefighter who joins Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service wants to do their best, the best job they can, to help, to support, to assist the public and to save lives. Those that were eventually deployed to the incident that night did the best job they could, albeit it was far too late. While we have already made significant changes to address the failings in how we responded on the night, the inquiry's recommendations provide a critically important framework for ensuring we take all the necessary steps to always be ready and able to respond to a terrorist attack anywhere in our city region. The report is long and complex. It will take time to digest the recommendations fully and cross-reference them against improvements which we have already put in place, and to consider whether any gaps remain. I do, however, want to address a few issues the report raises. As I've said, and the inquiry notes, we were simply too late in our response. But 5 years on from the attack, I want the public to know that this will never happen again. Today's Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service is better prepared, better equipped, better trained, better exercised and more resilient. The Kerslake review, set up by the Mayor of Greater Manchester after the attack, identified a number of recommendations which we have already put in place to improve and drive meaningful change within our service. And these changes have been tested during the multi-agency response to many major incidents in recent years. We knew immediately after the Arena attack that there had been a complete failure in multi-agency working. The inquiry's report makes that clear, and this has been a major focus for us since the attack. There has been a substantial shift in the leadership and culture of our service, recognised positively by His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services. We've undertaken a major overhaul of our policies and procedures in relation to a terrorist incident, revising and simplifying our mobilising arrangements, which ensure an automatic response to the scene. A dedicated radio channel is now established, which guarantees immediate contact 24/7 between blue light services and our control rooms. In addition to this, a national interagency liaison officer is now co-located with GMP's Force Duty Officer during working hours, with a dedicated emergency phone line for all other times. There's greater investment in training, multi-agency exercising, and increased emphasis on decision-making autonomy, meaning incident commanders can confidently make decisions with discretion. Wholesale changes have been made to organisational learning and our debrief processes, as well as major improvements in how we communicate and work together with our partner agencies during and after incidents, in conjunction with North West Fire Control and, importantly, across the wider Greater Manchester Resilience Forum. We have also established a more resilient marauding terrorist attack capability for Greater Manchester by increasing our capacity and capability, which sees every firefighter being fully trained and every fire appliance better equipped to respond to all forms of terrorist or mass casualty incident. I know the spotlight today is rightly on what our service got wrong on the night of the attack, and I want to reiterate my deepest apologies to the families and survivors. I want the public to know the same mistakes would not be made today, and have confidence that never again will we fall short of what the public should rightly expect of their fire and rescue service. I hope that the public will recognise that Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service is a very different organisation today to what it was in 2017, and that the improvements we've made and continue to make will provide confidence that we are prepared and able to respond to support the people of Greater Manchester when its fire and rescue services are needed. Thank you. I'd now like to introduce Darren Mockery, Chief Executive of North West Ambulance Service.
Good afternoon. For everyone connected with the atrocity on the 22nd of May 2017, the last 5 years have already produced painful reminders of that night's events. And although I'm well aware this day has been a long time coming for many, I know the feeling of pain, loss, fear and anger do not go away. My thoughts and sympathies are with you all, particularly with the bereaved families and the injured. We will never forget the profound impact of the attack on you, every member of the ambulance service and the communities we serve. I hope that today's report can give some answers. However, I understand that the answers may not be what everyone was looking for. I accept the findings and I thank Sir John Saunders and his team for their diligence. All those participating in emergency response that night did so trying to do their best and save lives, and repeatedly did just that. Brave actions which helped many people, staying with them in their time of need and administering ongoing care. Not just those from the ambulance service, but of course workers from other emergency services, NHS and members of the public. To all of you, you should be incredibly proud of your efforts. Your interventions will not be forgotten by the people who received them. Tragically, as we are all aware, 22 people didn't survive that night, and many others were seriously injured. When people do lose their lives, we understand that is how our performance will ultimately be judged, and this, quite rightly, is the case today. The number of responders treating people in the city room has been a great concern to many and is frequently mentioned in the report. We accept that more of our staff should have been deployed into the city room to help triage patients and manage their evacuation. What also produces deep regret is that our ability to work together as Blue Light partners fell well short of the standards we all expected. The principles of multi-agency working are incredibly important to the way we deal with major incidents. It should never have broken down so quickly and so drastically. We take our share of the responsibility for that. We failed to communicate situational awareness reports, we failed to share our major incident declarations, and we failed to establish adequate communication between our control rooms and each other. Also, what was laid bare during the inquiry is how we failed to learn from previous joint training exercises. To say we have now acted, I admit, seems a little too late. Nonetheless, it's important we do. Since the bombing, we have taken a series of important steps to ensure we capture learning and initiate change, improve communication between emergency control rooms and enhance our staff's awareness of multi-agency capabilities within major incidents. We have updated our major incident plans and introduced new specific policies for the arena and shared these with our operator and our Blue Light partners. What's more, to prepare our commanders more effectively, we have enhanced their training and made it more rigorous and sustained so their skills are maintained and frequently refreshed. Of course, there is much more still to digest from the report and the Chair's recommendations. I gladly take on the responsibility to make sure progress is made on them. And in my other role as the Chair of the Association of Ambulance Chief Executives, I will endorse changes required of our national partners to improve ambulance responses all over the country. I am confident that if something like this happens again, the response will have more effective preparation, management and coordination between Blue Light partners here today. I also believe that everyone at NWAS would strive to respond with professionalism, compassion and a desire to help. On occasions like this, the word sorry has the risk of sounding hollow. Nevertheless, I want to make it clear that whilst our actions were well-intentioned, we apologise wholeheartedly for our failures. They weigh heavily on us individually and as an organisation. Lastly, I want to use this opportunity to invite the families of those who have lost loved ones, should they wish to meet with us and ask any questions they have. Thank you.
Will serving police officers who have been named in today's report, will they face any further action as a result of today's report?
So it is important, of course, that we digest the full content of the report. It's a weighty document, as we've set out. It is the case that in respect of an individual, referrals have already been made to the Independent Office for Police Complaints. I think in the interests of natural justice, we ought to allow those processes to take their course. And of course, this very detailed report will be taken fully account of, I am sure, by those who are bringing individuals' actions to scrutiny. It's probably unfair for me in this context to go much further in that respect on the basis that, as I say, processes are in hand and they really ought to be allowed to take their course.
So many of the failings identified in today's report seem remarkably basic. We have ambulances that didn't use stretchers, we have emergency services not talking to each other, fire appliances, of course, driving away from the scene. And we know that there was multi-agency or training exercises that took place before the attack. So why, therefore, can members of the public, people in Greater Manchester, have any confidence that what you've done since will make a difference and ensure that these kind of failings don't reoccur?
If I, without being presumptuous, if I perhaps take the lead in terms of answering that, I think, firstly and foremost, it cannot be denied that much of what went wrong had been planned for, and the execution of what had been planned for was simply not delivered, which implies that the exercise is designed to test the training and the learning that we try to introduce into our various systems, and certainly collectively did not take root. It is that has driven our collective responses. If you take, for example, in Greater Manchester, the Local Resilience Forum, we have collectively bolstered the whole panoply of testing and exercise facility that sits behind the LRF. Our planning for exercises is altogether more rigorous. The management of objectives, recommendations, learning, and baking that into our operating practices is very much more assiduously done. And fundamentally, I think it is also the case that the rigour as well as the regularity of exercises will bring out in those tasked, very often in extremis with leadership, will exercise their responsibilities to the standard that is required.
Picking up on that same point, you rehearsed for this kind of event just the year before the attack. You were told then that you needed to learn lessons. You did not learn them. So why should the confidence of the public be placed in you to learn them this time? What's changed? Why should they believe you?
Well, I reiterate some of the points that I've made. I'll turn, if I might, to David just to speak to shared issues within the Local Resilience Forum in a minute, if you might, David. But one, I repeat my point about the Local Resilience Forum. I do not in any sense seek to duck the very fact that this volume sets out very clearly that there were some lessons that were absolutely germane to what subsequently went wrong. And there is no excuse for it. We should have learned from those lessons. Those lessons weren't picked up upon. Please don't underestimate the excoriating effect of that very fact upon us all. And it is the galvanizing effect of that that makes a big difference. Insofar as the LRF is concerned, David, perhaps you can comment from your own perspective as to the work that we've done in that regard.
Yeah, I can, and I think it's important to acknowledge that Winchester Accord, specifically a year prior to the attack, was a exercise where lessons that have been learned played out at that particular exercise. I think in terms of why should the public take confidence now, as Stephen has mentioned, there has been a significant overhaul of the Greater Manchester Resilience Forum, particularly how robustly learning is tracked through and drives meaningful change across the blue light services. And there's a level of accountability that we deliver on those recommendations. Since the attack, there's been in excess of 160 multi-agency exercises. There has been 15 major declarations of a major incident across Greater Manchester since 2017, where the blue light services have displayed that they can confidently perform against the Jessup principles. So I do think the environment today is different than it was in 2017, and it's important that we continue to drive that improvement.
Just on the way to Pat from the Press Association.
I'm right in thinking, though, it's still the fact that no one's been disciplined yet, or certainly not sacked, but no one's been disciplined from any of the four services that you represent for their actions or inactions on the night.
I mean, that's certainly correct from a Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service perspective. And if I can respond to that, I think throughout the inquiry, and indeed in terms of my statement, I acknowledge that individual mistakes were made on that night, and witnesses from my service made those concessions during the course of the inquiry. What I do believe is that this was a systems failure. It was a catastrophic failure of Jessup working where the system failed. And it's that where the real improvements lie, in my view, as opposed to focusing on specific individuals where mistakes were made by them, but it wasn't one individual's mistake that led to the response on the night. So where we need to focus on is continuing the joint multi-agency preparation, training, exercising and learning, and make sure that that is channelled robustly through the Greater Manchester Resilience Forum.
And perhaps I could mention in relation to British Transport Police, and obviously we reflected on the findings in Volume 1. The position that we're in at the moment in relation to our officers that should have been on patrol in the area, that an investigation remains underway. It is a directed investigation by the IOPC. And I'm sure, as you all appreciate, because it is still continuing, I would not want to say anything here today that is likely to undermine that process. But I do share the disappointment that I have heard people comment on in terms of the length of time that is taking.
And from a North West Ambulance Service perspective, I know that all of our ambulance staff, including the commanders that responded that night, responded to do their best and save lives. That's why I joined the ambulance service as a paramedic many years ago, and I know they wanted to do that night. And I'm truly sorry, as Dave says, that we collectively didn't get things right on the night, as we've already heard from the report. So I'm sorry for that.
And if in just concluding on the panel's commentary, without necessarily repeating that which I've said before, also referencing the IOPC. But I just reiterate the point that David has just made, that there were a number of mistakes that were made, and mistakes that were made at an individual level. But I am also clear that GMP as an organisation cannot absolve itself of responsibility for having put people into positions where potentially through a lack of training or a lack of support or a lack of systemic support because of inadequate processes and many of those other things that we've already described, that they have failed in their duty. And I do think it important just to reflect that some of those mistakes were born of a corporate failure as opposed to individual misconduct.
Andy from Granada.
So I think what the families want or maybe need now is accountability, and you talk about systemic failures. The former police and fire chiefs are both no longer in position, so where should the buck stop?
Well, I mean, the buck stops with me. I'm head of service. I'm the Chief Fire Officer of Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service. Joined the service 2 years ago. I take responsibility for the performance of the service on the night. What I can control is what I've done in the 2 years I've been in the service. And as I said, we are a service that is better prepared, better trained, better exercised and more resilient. And the guarantee that I can provide is that should there be a similar event anywhere across our city region, then the response from my service will be fundamentally different than it was back in 2017.
And in a similar way, the buck stops with me on behalf of GMP. I don't think it's not within my gift to cast backward. It is only within my gift to make sure that the service that I now lead does what we have said. We are accountable, and we will be accountable, and properly so, for our performance against the many recommendations in this volume. And it is against those recommendations that we will make absolutely sure that never again do we repeat these failings. The bottom line is one always has to accept responsibility, and for what it's worth, I do not in any way shy away from personal responsibility as the lead for GMP to get this right going forward.
The people who were in charge at the time aren't around to accept their responsibility.
Be that as it may, I can only tell you what I'm doing now, what I intend to do into the future, and how the public might view me as an accountable servant of our communities in Greater Manchester.
If I could add to that, you know, I'm responsible for British Transport Police, but what I would say, I think it's our collective responsibility as the 4 people who are leading emergency services in Greater Manchester to make sure that our people are well equipped, well trained, to be able to do the job that the public expect and that we expect them to do.
And I'm not going to repeat what's already been said clearly, but just to give an assurance to the public across not just the North West, because as you heard earlier on, I'm also the chair of the Association of Ambulance Chief Executives. I will do everything I can to ensure that every single one of the recommendations for the ambulance sector are actioned and not just learned across the North West, but right across the whole country.
Okay, I'm going to go to Greg from Sky.
Chief Constable, you said that in previous tragedies we've seen the lessons have not actually been learned and implemented. If this were to happen again tomorrow, how do you reassure the public that some of these mistakes, all of these mistakes, wouldn't be made again?
As has been suggested, many of the amendments to our operating model which have already been made have been exercised both in the exercise arena and in real-time events. So we've had over 15 multi-agency major incidents to which we have responded. And on the basis of the amendments that we've made to the operating model, those things that ought to have swung into place did, and the required operational effect was achieved. But I do think that in terms of my reflections, both on behalf of a wider system, but parochially in respect of GMP, I do recognise that so much of what went wrong stemmed right from the outset from a failure to coordinate as we ought to have done. And it is that that then gave rise to so much that subsequently went wrong. And it is in respect of that early grip, the command, the coordination, an FDO that will not be overwhelmed, a function within the control room that will not be overwhelmed. It is that that gives me absolute confidence. God forbid we should have to do this again. That some of the things that went wrong, almost as a domino from not getting it right at the outset, would just not happen again. And of that, I am absolutely 100% confident.
Go to Jackie from Channel 4.
Thank you. Claire Booth's sister Kelly lost her life that night. While they waited for help, Claire said she had to make a choice between helping her sister and helping her 12-year-old daughter. And she told the inquiry she learnt a terrible truth that night, that essentially if you get caught up in a terrorist incident, you're on your own. She said, you'll have to look after yourself or rely on the public. And I wonder, when you are talking about and to someone who has been so let down, how can you convince them that these reassurances, this idea that lessons have already been learned, is worth hearing?
Yeah. So again, my heart and thoughts and sympathies go out to the family affected in this terrible incident. We've heard a lot today in the report about the care gap, and we know that there are a number of recommendations trying to address what to do in that time it takes for the emergency services to arrive on scene. So again, we're going to take time to look at the report and make sure that those recommendations, and particularly with the question you've asked around that care gap, that we see what more can we do to support the public until such time as emergency services arrive on scene.
Okay, I'm going to go to Julian from Channel 5. Just so that you run away. Cool. Kevin from Radio Manchester. You want me to move on? Okay. Vicky from Hits.
Thanks. At a time when the UK is facing financial crisis and organisations are seemingly always needing to cut back and tighten their budgets, how can the families and also the general public be assured that these recommendations will be met and resourced, but importantly, that they'll continue to be resourced and prioritised in future years amidst tightening budgets?
I mean, for me, it's just really important that we make sure that we're absolutely transparent in terms of ensuring that people can see the fact that we're making these changes. I mean, for me, this is a non-negotiable aspect of spend for our budget. There is not a choice to be made in terms of making sure that we are well prepared for the future should there be such a horrific attack ever again. And making sure that we invest in training, command training, training of our officers, our community support officers, again, is not negotiable. And also, if we look at some of the other areas for learning in terms of first aid, equipment, you know, it's my responsibility as a Chief Constable to make sure that everybody has the right training and equipment to do the job effectively, which is to protect the public. And, you know, I recognise your question about, you know, some of the challenges of finance, but for me, there are other choices that would need to be made, because this is not a negotiable area in terms of cutting spend.
And I would very much echo that. As it happens, of course, in policing at the moment, we are in a position of growth, happily. It may not sustain itself, but we are at the moment growing very powerfully in terms of our resources. But from a parochial perspective in Greater Manchester Police, we have made a number of improvements recently, and that has been recognised out with the force as recently as last week. But the point about those improvements that we have made is very much about a really vigorous, assiduous focus on getting the basics right. And it is against those measures that we have made so many strides. And in echoing the point that Chief Constable Dorsey has just issued, for me, the ability to respond to an emergency well with partners is a basic requirement of an effective force, and it is therefore the case where I absolutely endorse the point just made that this is not the first place you go, even if resources tighten up. It is very much the last place, and it's certainly the last place we will be going.
If I can just add, I don't want to repeat what my colleagues have said, but I am unequivocal in my view that the most important service we provide is our emergency response service, and how we prepare, how we respond, how we learn will remain my priority whilst I'm the Chief of Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service. Importantly, and I alluded to it in my statement, we have made incrementally over the last 5 years significant improvements in the service, none more so than what we're currently doing at the moment around improving our capacity and capability to respond to a marauding terrorist attack, which will see firefighters who are better trained, better access to medical equipment, better access to PPE to be able to deploy at the incident, and the importance of our emergency response will always remain front and centre.
Just going back to Kev from Radio Manchester. Sorry, I caught you off guard before.
So this is a question to you all, but particularly to the fire service and the ambulance service. Have you anything to say to the family of John Atkinson, who the report said would have survived had it not been for some of the mistakes that were made?
So my thoughts and condolences very much go out to John's family. We wish we could have done more to have saved John and got to John quicker than we did. As we've already heard, there were a number of multi-agency failings that contributed to not perhaps getting to John as quickly as anyone would have liked. I'm more than happy to sit down with John's family and explain some of that in more detail, but not today.
I can only apologise unreservedly to John and his family. The fact that we were not there as a service, as I've said, will forever be a deep matter of regret. Helping people is wired into the DNA of a firefighter. You know, we had a role there. We would have been able to support the triage process, the treatment and the extrication of casualties, and the fact that we were not there, and in the context of not being able to support John, then I am truly, truly sorry about that.
Just going to Mark from The Guardian, and then we're going to take probably one final question after that.
Mark Brown from The Guardian. Can I just ask whoever wants to answer, how are you feeling personally? What emotions you're feeling? Is it anger, shame, however you want to put it?
Well, I'll start because, frankly, the emotions of today are very raw for us. I personally feel so very strongly for the families who we have let down. We do describe for ourselves very high standards, and when we fail to achieve those, it is just pretty miserable. But nothing, of course, in our reflection in any way touches upon what we know families must be feeling. I think there's a combination, therefore, of real sadness, real disappointment, an element of being ashamed that we have not done what it is that we set out to do, but also a real, genuine determination to make sure that this never happens again. And in that respect, the point about making sure that the hurt and the terrible pain that people find themselves in isn't totally for nothing. What it certainly galvanizes in me and all of those that I work with in GMP is to make sure that we redouble our efforts to make sure, not just to suspect, not to have an inkling of, but to be absolutely certain that our response is first class and it is resilient and it does what it is supposed to do in extremis.
And I walked through the arena last night, late last night, and I walked through it again this morning, and I felt terribly emotional. I felt really angry and hugely disappointed around the delivery on that night. But what I am absolutely committed to ensuring with my force and specifically with my Chief Officer team is ensuring, and I absolutely know today that we are in a different position. We would respond more effectively, but I will be absolutely focused on making sure we just continue to get better and better. And that is my commitment to the families, everyone who was present at on the night, and the communities of Greater Manchester.
My thoughts, first and foremost, remain with the families and the survivors in terms of how do I feel. I do feel saddened and I do feel ashamed. On appointment, I've invested hundreds and hundreds of hours talking to frontline firefighters and fire officers in my service, and the pain and the sadness that they were not there to do what they were trained to do will always be a deep matter of regret for the service. And as colleagues have said, and as I have accepted, as the head of the service, the buck stops with me. And what it does do is drive a real inner determination, because leadership plays a key part here in making sure that the response of our service is better, and the response of our service in a multi-agency setting is far, far more efficient and effective than it was back in May 2017.
And I think from my perspective, it is really kind of mixed emotions, because we heard a lot of positive things come out of the report today, and we heard some real examples of bravery from many emergency responders, members of the public, ambulance staff, but equally real sadness and disappointment that we made mistakes and we didn't get things right for everybody on the night.
Okay, just going to take one more final question, if anybody wants to ask one. We good? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ready? Good evening, everybody. As you can see, I'm joined by Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime, Baroness Beverly Hughes, and the Leader of Manchester City Council, Councillor Bev Craig. After I've spoken, I'll invite the Deputy Mayor to speak, and then Bev Craig to speak, and then, of course, we'll go into questions. I want to thank Sir John and his inquiry team for giving us the fullest picture of what happened at Manchester Arena on the night of the 22nd of May 2017 and into the early hours of the 23rd. To those injured, to everyone still struggling, and most importantly, to the families of those who died, particularly John's family and Safi's family, I wish to say this very clearly. You were badly let down on that night. You were entitled to expect much better from our emergency services than the response provided. And as you have heard from them today, everyone here is truly sorry that did not happen. Of course, there were many people who did act courageously and selflessly in the moment, as Sir John said himself today. We recognise what they did. Police officers and paramedics did run into what they believed to be a dangerous situation, as did arena staff, travel-safe officers and staff from Northern Rail at Victoria Station. In particular, the members of the public who helped others in a desperate situation deserve our huge thanks and more recognition for what they did. Many people in all emergency services did do their jobs properly, but they were let down by the lack of a properly organised response. As the inquiry report makes clear, the reason people were left in this unacceptable position was the result of poor advanced planning and a failure to follow established guidance for an incident of this nature. That led to a poorly coordinated and confused response operation on the night. There is no justification nor excuse for this. I can only speak for the services for which I am responsible, Greater Manchester Police and Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service. And in my view, they failed so badly because at the time they had poor leadership, a poor internal culture, and an inability to collaborate properly and apply JESIP principles as the public should have been entitled to expect. Back in 2017, it was particularly the failure of the fire service to respond on the night which exposed the fact that something was seriously amiss with the overall response. That was the reason why the Deputy Mayor and I decided it would be wrong to wait for this public inquiry to conclude, and instead we initiated our own process of inquiry and learning. We asked Lord Kerslake to undertake a non-statutory review so that we could begin to understand what had happened and make changes to our police service and our fire service at the earliest opportunity. I note today that the Kerslake report has been endorsed by the chair of the inquiry and has been used as a foundation for today's report. With regard to the fire service, the Kerslake report in 2018 helped us get quickly to the scale of the internal problems it had, which was confirmed by visits to all fire stations in Greater Manchester that the Deputy Mayor and I personally undertook. I can say this with confidence to the people of Greater Manchester. Your fire service of today is not the fire service of 2017. It has new, more effective leadership, which in turn has brought about an improvement in internal culture and, as His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services has confirmed, has also improved in the way the service supports its staff. Evidence of this can be seen in the agreement reached by the new Chief Fire Officer and the Fire Brigades Union for a new approach to dealing with a marauding terrorist attack. Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service is currently training all of its firefighters to respond in that eventuality, equipping all pumps with the capability, and alongside London is the first fire service in the country to do so. With regards to Greater Manchester Police, what this inquiry reveals is very troubling. It is barely believable to me, given my request to them to cooperate fully with the Kerslake report, that our police force back then provided an inaccurate account of their actions 9 months after the attack, which was signed off by the former Chief Constable, something which he accepted in evidence in 2021 was a, quote, grave error. It is my view that the force tried to stick for too long to a corporate narrative that suggested it had acted effectively. That wasn't just disrespectful to the families and those injured. It had the effect of misleading myself and the Deputy Mayor, denied everyone the opportunity to learn, and delayed the action needed to improve the force. This is sadly something we have seen in the aftermath of other disasters, and a pattern that keeps on repeating. In late 2020, I had all the evidence I needed to change the leadership of Greater Manchester Police, and that is what I did. Last week, His Majesty's Chief Inspector of Constabulary confirmed that there has been a total turnaround since. So I can also say this with confidence to the Greater Manchester public. Your police force of today is a very different entity to what it was in 2017. But there is no complacency at all on our part. We will face up fully to every single word and recommendation in this report to ensure that the process of improvement and learning in both services continues, and the Deputy Mayor will say more about this in a moment. However, I see 4 additional substantial actions which are needed in the light of what has been revealed today. First, I have asked the new Chief Constable and Chief Fire Officer to consider whether we need a major overhaul of the handling of 999 calls in Greater Manchester. While I do not criticise individual members of staff, it is clear that North West Fire Control did not adequately support the response on that night. This has led me to question whether the arrangement of handling 999 fire calls in a separate service outside of Greater Manchester is the right one for us going forward, particularly when it comes to mounting the best joint response we can to major incidents. Therefore, I have asked for an evaluation from both chiefs on whether we should co-locate police and fire in a joint control room in Greater Manchester. I expect to receive that in the new year and will make a further statement then. Second, I am clear that this inquiry provides a major point of reflection and learning, not just for our police force, but indeed for every police force in England and Wales and public service in the country. Time and again, in the aftermath of major incidents, we have seen how public services have failed to tell the truth at the first time of asking. This doesn't just deny bereaved families the answers they deserve, which is appalling in itself. It denies those organisations the opportunity to learn and change. A legal duty of candour on all public servants would break this pattern that keeps on repeating. It would empower police officers and public servants at every level to say what they feel needs to be said to all official inquiries, and thereby resist any pressure from above not to do so. In that way, it will be a protection against the wrong behaviours that can lead to poor cultures. It is 5 years this week since Bishop James Jones recommended a statutory duty of candour in his report on the experience of the Hillsborough families. Given that a previous Prime Minister personally commissioned his review, I consider it disrespectful to her, to the Hillsborough families, to the Manchester Arena families and the Grenfell families, that review has lain on a Whitehall shelf for 5 full years without so much as a government response. This cannot continue. I have had a constructive meeting this week with the new Home Secretary, and I call on her to bring forward a response as soon as possible and to accept the need for a statutory duty of candour. In my view, a culture of speaking candidly is what our new Chief Constable has brought to Greater Manchester Police. It is what has helped us to exit special measures, and it can do the same for other police forces as a tool for learning and improvement. But it needs to be enshrined on a permanent basis. To help, if the government would like to trial its approach, I would like to offer Greater Manchester to the Home Secretary as a place where we would be willing to do that, working in partnership with the Home Office. Third, like Sir John, I want to point to another legislative change which is needed, and if enacted, would actually help the emergency services do their job. This is the duty to protect, or Martin's Law, which would strengthen security arrangements at public venues, big and small, and create a consistency and clarity currently lacking. We pay tribute to Martin's mum, Figan Murray, for championing this change, but its implementation is now overdue, as Sir John said. The government must turn commitments to legislate, given to Figan and others, into real action, and resist any calls to water down this important and much-needed law. Fourth and finally, I want to ensure that the findings of this authoritative and important public inquiry will be protected in perpetuity and not be allowed to be undermined or subverted by those who wish to present false narratives and conspiracies. I find it utterly abhorrent that people injured in this atrocity and families bereaved have been harassed and trolled by those who seek to portray it as a hoax. I can barely believe that something like this is even happening in a country like ours. But I have seen also how it is becoming more common for the victims of this and other disasters to be on the receiving end of trolling using false narratives. I call, therefore, on the government to consider making it a specific offence to deny the facts about major disasters, such as the deaths that occurred, and to subvert the findings of non-contested inquiries like this, creating false narratives and conspiracies which re-traumatise victims. In conclusion, over the last 5 years, I have had the privilege of getting to know the families who lost loved ones on that night. They are, without exception, wonderful people who, as I said at the start, deserve so much better. I have also got to know many of those injured and have seen firsthand how they have come together to help each other through initiatives such as our incredible Survivors Choir. I hope they all know me well enough by now to know that I would never give them platitudes like lessons will be learned. What I can instead say to them today is that major changes have already been made on the back of what happened, and more are to come. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I know that today will be yet another traumatic day for the bereaved families, the survivors, and those close to them. They have endured and continue to endure the most unimaginable pain. And hearing the detail of today's findings, whilst very important to them, will rehearse yet again their anguish and their loss, and I'm thinking especially of them today. I join the Mayor in recognising the individual and organisational failures in the response of our police and fire and rescue services on the night of the arena attack, and I too am truly sorry for that. When the attack happened, the Mayor and I had been in post for only a couple of weeks. We did not expect that our emergency services, there to protect our communities and save lives, could fail in this catastrophic way. I recognise that the challenges faced by emergency responders at the scene were incredibly difficult, dealing with hundreds of casualties in a context of uncertainty and danger, not knowing whether another shooter existed or there was another imminent attack planned. Those who responded immediately at the scene, professionals and members of the public alike, were heroic and selfless, and I commend them. They did the best they could, while some of their senior commanders failed them and failed the victims. 36 hours after the attack, the Mayor and I went to the City Room. We talked to the forensic experts and counter-terrorism detectives who had already, even by then, made significant progress in securing evidence from what was a devastating scene. The painstaking investigation that followed was meticulous, as was the support for families and survivors. The successful extradition and prosecution of the terrorist brother and accomplice was a major achievement. However, commendable as all these actions were in the days, months, and indeed years after the attack, they cannot eclipse the terrible failures of the emergency services on the night. I too extend my thanks to the Chair of the Inquiry, Sir John, and to his team. Today's report has been a long time coming. It's very thorough, and whilst we'll need some time to digest all the detail, we accept the findings in full. I want to repeat at the outset what the Mayor has said, that Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service and Greater Manchester Police that we have today are unrecognisable from the organisations the Mayor and I inherited in 2017. There have been two distinct phases of transformation since then, which have led to these significant changes. Firstly, immediately after the arena attack, we knew we could not wait for years for an official inquiry before the families and the public had some answers. And that's why, as the Mayor said, we set up the Kerslake Review, which was published in 2018. Under the framework of the Greater Manchester Resilience Forum, which I began to attend personally, a robust process of implementation of all the Kerslake recommendations was begun and monitored closely. For example, the Fire Service made changes to the NILO role, the National Interagency Liaison Officer role, to ensure greater communication and collaboration with partners, including having a NILO permanently co-located in the GMP Force Duty Office during working hours, with communication channels in place for direct contact at all other times. NILOs are now automatically mobilised by North West Fire Control to chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear or explosive incidents and marauding terrorist attacks, MTAs. It was clear on the night of the attack that there was a failure of joint working and in particular of the JESIP principles, the Joint Emergency Service Interoperability principles between all three emergency services. JESIP principles stipulate that emergency services should co-locate at the earliest opportunity, communicate, coordinate, jointly assess and understand the risk, and have shared situational awareness. A dedicated radio channel for North West Fire Control, GMP, NWAS and the other partners' control rooms was established immediately after the arena attack. Since then, the system has evolved and the current system, the Emergency Service Interoperability Control, allows for communication between control rooms across the North West. A Greater Manchester radio channel for blue light commanders remains in place. Both channels are regularly tested and have been effectively used in multi-agency incidents and exercises since then. Many multi-agency training exercises have taken place to test JESIP and joint working between major incidents at a local and city region level, involving all the emergency services and other partners since the arena attack. JESIP training has been embedded through online and face-to-face training for all operational officers and incident commanders. In GMFRS, for example, 194 officers have taken place in JESIP training and 70 tri-service JESIP training sessions have taken place. The specific issues for GMP that arose from the Kerslake report, for example, for the force duty officer and the training of officers, have similarly been addressed. The force duty officer had too many demands on the night, and since the attack, the firearms role has been separated out. The force duty officer is now based at GMP headquarters, and in the event of an incident, JESIP principles are implemented immediately, such that the force duty officer is fully supported at headquarters and other emergency services co-locate with them. The second phase of organisational transformation, subsequent to these immediate and specific post-attack measures, has been for both the police and the fire service a fundamental change in leadership culture, organisation, accountability, governance and performance management. The Mayor's already referred to the fact that many firefighters contacted both of us with their concerns about the leadership and culture in the fire service, and that we visited every fire station and premises to make sure the voices of officers and staff were being heard. We changed the leadership, appointed a new interim chief fire officer and instituted a wide-ranging programme of change in every area of organisational and operational activity. Following his appointment in 2020, under Chief Fire Officer David Russell's leadership, there has been a sea change in the culture of the organisation, recognised by the Chief Inspector, who now judges the service to be good in this area. With the Chief Fire Officer, the Mayor and I have also set new priorities for the fire service outlined in the fire plan, and the service continues to make the improvements it needs. The Mayor's already spoken about improvements to our MTA, our MTA capabilities, I beg your pardon. And every one of our firefighters is receiving enhanced training, and specialist equipment will be available on every fire engine, so they can respond quickly and effectively to a terrorist attack or mass casualty incident. The training includes a practical multi-agency training day with the Blue Light Partners and North West Fire Control, and is aligned with the police and ambulance services, including joint training exercises to test our integrated response. And in September 2022, the Chief Inspector removed the cause of concern for MTA and was satisfied that the new capability would provide a robust response to any future terrorist incident. In relation to GMP, the substantive failure of leadership by senior commanders identified by the inquiry report today is an indictment but it's one that has already been identified by Her Majesty's Chief Inspector, and we have acted to change fundamentally the leadership, culture and performance across the board. 2 years ago, the then Chief Constable was asked to leave and Stephen Watson was appointed last year. He began immediately defining the new strategic direction to secure the necessary improvements and building a new senior officer team. The Chief Inspector last week, as you've heard, released GMP from special measures in the light of the very significant improvements so far, and that process of change continues. I am confident that both GMP and the Fire Service are fundamentally different organisations than they were in 2017. Focused now on serving the public effectively, on continuously improving their performance, accountable and transparent, and with outstanding leaders. But there is no complacency here. We must now assess systematically the recommendations of the inquiry report against the measures we have already taken and ensure that all the outstanding recommendations are implemented in full as soon as possible. When we saw how the people of Greater Manchester came together during our most difficult time, demonstrated that exemplary civic and public response, stood together to show we were not going to let the terrorists win, then it's very clear to us that they deserve nothing but the best, and that's what we will strive for. Thank you.
Good evening. The 22nd of May 2017 was a dark and harrowing day for our city and will never be forgotten by anyone in Manchester. Today is another difficult day for families of those lost, for survivors, and for so many other people affected, and they remain in our thoughts. Although today's report is not about the City Council, I'm here alongside the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor to make a short statement on behalf of the city as we reflect again on that terrible day and night and its aftermath. Earlier this year we marked the 5th anniversary of the attack as we opened the Glade of Light, a permanent memorial honouring the 22 people whose lives were so cruelly cut short. We also remember all of those who are injured, many of whom are still living with physical and mental impact of what happened to this day. Sir John Saunders rightly reflected today, and we've heard it this evening, on the many examples of individual acts of bravery, especially from the public on that night. It's right that they are recognised and that they are remembered. What we know, but for those most closely affected by the events of that day, especially those who lost loved ones, the pain is still very raw. The findings of the public inquiry about how people were let down badly by emergency services in the immediate aftermath make for deeply distressing reading. It's essential for those most closely involved, for the city and indeed for the country, that we go through this process, however painful, to understand how events unfolded that night. It will take some time to digest the inquiry report in full and indeed its recommendations, but it's clear, and we've heard repeatedly, that the response of emergency services on that night was simply not good enough and that people deserve better. While it is only right that services have apologised, it is vital they now set out the actions they have taken and will now take, both individually and collectively. That means that things would be different, that they would be better in the future. And we have heard some of those actions already taking place today, as has been set out throughout the course of the afternoon. The report sets out a range of actions for emergency services at a Greater Manchester, regional and national level, and also actions for the government. One such legislative change is the duty to protect, or Martin's Law, as we've heard. In Manchester, we've already embedded these principles in our licensing process and worked with staff at hundreds of premises who have had counter-terrorism training. But this must go further, it must go faster, and urgently needs to be enshrined in law. Sir John and the inquiry will monitor progress on the report's actions, and on behalf of the City and the City Council, I will seek assurances that these recommendations are and have been acted upon. Today's report is harrowing, it's deeply upsetting, and it's uncomfortable. But it's absolutely necessary, as it's imperative that actions are taken to address failings, not just in honour of those who lost their lives on the 22nd of May 2017, or those whose lives were changed forever, but so no one has to go through similar grief and trauma in the future. Manchester continues to support the important work of the public inquiry as it enters its final phase. And once again, I would like to convey my thanks to Sir John and the inquiry team. But importantly, and especially, pay a heartfelt tribute to the incredible families who have lost loved ones and survivors who have painfully relived their darkest hours to ensure a true account was heard and to inform improvements for the future. A future response that must be better. And above all, my thoughts are with those killed, the families of those lost, and the survivors and those affected on one of the worst days in our city's long history. We will never forget.
Thank you very much indeed, Bev. We will never forget, and we will always support the families into the future. Colleagues, it's over to you to ask any questions to any of us. Actually, so start, Paul.
Hello, Phil McCann from BBC North West tonight. You talked about being misled by Ian Hopkins. He stayed in his job, of course, as Chief Constable for 3 years after the attack. I wonder if you feel that you can adequately hold him and other Chief Constables to account. I wonder if you feel betrayed by him, and I wonder if you regret keeping him in post for so long.
What this reveals today, this report, is how difficult it can be to challenge a police force if the narrative that is coming up is one that is not reflecting the reality. And from myself, and the Deputy Mayor would corroborate this, that is the narrative we were told in the aftermath. So it wasn't just to Kerslake, that was the narrative. It makes it very hard because we didn't have evidence to disprove that, and in fact we'd set up the Kerslake review precisely for that purpose, to provide that independent assurance of whether or not what was being said was correct. And it was only, as you'll see in the report, in the very final days before the Kerslake report was published that things changed. So it makes the job very difficult, and that's why I have called for a duty of candour today. I think that would make the job of all police and crime commissioners in England and Wales easier. Because if there was such a duty on people at every level of a police force, I think the truth would be established more quickly in the aftermath of incidents like this, and then, in our case, myself and the Deputy Mayor, but others would be able to hold those senior people to account. So I think what comes through here is that we didn't have the evidence in relation, we had it in relation to the fire service, but we didn't have that clear picture in relation to Greater Manchester Police. And obviously a line was taken through that process, the Kerslake process, which in the end was not the correct view. And it's that obfuscation that makes it very hard for people in the position that I and others are in, and it's why I've called for the change that I have today. But obviously when I had the evidence, I did act. And that change was made. And Greater Manchester Police is a very different police force today as a result of that change.
Hiya, Kevin from Radio On that, so the duty of candour, I mean, essentially what what appears to have happened is the people up at the top came up with a narrative which essentially protected them. So are you saying that the duty of candour would be on the lower levels, so they would be obliged to speak out rather than keeping their mouth shut to protect the people above them? And on that, I mean, the Chief Constable of Police went with a healthy payout, no doubt. The boss of the fire service went with a healthy payout, no doubt. And people might be watching this saying, with all the leaders saying lessons have been learned, thinking, well, I'm sure people don't want to, you don't want to make it personal, but there are two high-profile people at the top who oversaw all these failures, who walked away with a healthy payout. So is there some regret from you that was allowed to happen?
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Let me take both of those questions. If, Bev, you want to come in and answer as well, please do. On the first question, the duty of candour would apply corporately to an entity, a police service or another public body, but it would also apply individually on all people employed by that service. And the reason why I believe this is so profoundly important, because this is a pattern that has repeated through the decades, is that it would actually be a protection to those people in the lower levels of an organisation, because, as I say, it would apply equally all the way down. It would be a protection for them if they chose to challenge a corporate narrative or speak out in a way that the organisation might find inconvenient. That is what you need, in my experience, if you want to get to the truth at the first and earliest opportunity. And getting to the truth at the first and earliest opportunity is massively in the public interest, because it's at that point that an organisation can start to learn and to then improve. And I can only say from our experience that it was when you finally can see the full picture and you can correctly say what's wrong, that the organisation can actually start to turn the corner and come back. So I think the duty of candour is profoundly important. It's 5 years today since this week since it was recommended. It really needs to move forward if the government is serious about removing the other forces from special measures and having a situation in this country where bereaved families are not re-traumatised by the false narratives and the pushing away that they often experience in the aftermath of events like these. On the second part of your question, as I just said a moment ago to Phil, when I had all the evidence I needed, I acted immediately. And in acting immediately, I wanted to make sure that I created the conditions as quickly as possible for the organisation to begin to improve. And the clear advice I received is that that would be better done by doing no more, I might say, than honouring contractual commitments. So there was no additional. It was only the contractual commitment that was in place. If I had tried to do more and reduce contractual commitments, then we would have ended in probably a protracted legal situation, which could in the end have cost more money. So the clear advice I had from the most senior officers in the Greater Manchester Combined Authority was to honour the contractual commitments, create the change as quickly as possible, and then open up the circumstances in which new leadership could come in. And I would say to you, Kevin, this evening, that Greater Manchester Police is the quickest police force out of special measures because of the actions that I and the Deputy Mayor took. Anybody else? Yeah, the colleague towards the back.
Hi, Lyle from the Manchester Evening News. You've said repeatedly that the police and the fire service are sort of unrecognisable now as how they were 5 years ago. And you've said about how close you are with the families and how you've been working so much with them over the last 5 years. But just how much confidence do you have that if a similar situation were to happen today, that GMP fire service could act in a different way than they did then, and act properly as the report's given up?
So thank you. So I have made that point, and the Deputy Mayor made that point. But in some ways, don't just take our word for it. Look at what His Majesty's Chief Inspector is saying in relation to both services. They are assessed independently to be in a very different place than they were. On the second part of your question, I would refer to what I heard the Chief Constable say in the previous session. Leadership, I talk about leadership a lot. What is good leadership? Good leadership is doing it directly from the front, taking a grip of a situation. And I'm pretty confident I heard the Chief Constable say today that he would be the gold commander on a night, God forbid, if we were to see any repeat. And everything comes from that. The most senior people taking responsibility for a situation, providing the clarity then across the organisation. That didn't happen in 2017. But I have no doubt in my mind whatsoever, and I say this to the public of Greater Manchester, were there to be a repeat of something similar, I have no doubt that our Chief Constable and our Chief Fire Officer would be in the same room within a very short space of time. They would both be leading from the front, and from that, the officers providing senior leadership at the scene and everybody else would have absolute clarity as to what was expected of them.
Can I just make a comment? Thanks, Niall. I would just add to that, you know, in saying that we are confident that the different organisations now, we're not saying that nothing could go wrong in the future, we can just leave them to it. Because as the report itself makes clear, one of the significant failures was that on the night, what people needed to do, the application, for instance, of the Jessup principles, come together at a single place, was not embedded in their psyche or in their practice. It should just kick in automatically because it's been so well rehearsed, so well repeated in training exercises, it should just happen. That is what we have to keep doing. As I said, that started, there's a really robust and rigorous programme now of interagency exercises. We have to continue that, and it's the job of the Mayor and I to make sure that through the Resilience Forum and through our holding our chief officers to account, we have evidence ourselves that those exercises continue so that the individual people in those services are ready to respond in the right way should they need to.
Thanks, Bill. Any further questions? If not, colleagues, I know you've had a long afternoon. Thank you very much for bearing with us.